Have you been looking for a build that makes you want to blast Freebird while raining down supernova like explosions upon your enemies? Is it vital to you that the build can also move at warp speed? Do you also want that build to have a little falcon friend that wears his own ridiculously cute armor? Well, that's weirdly specific, but lucky for you, I've got just what you've been looking for. All right, hello and welcome. This is the Shadow Dagger's Falconer guide. I've been waiting for a while now to put this one out. I'm really stoked about it. It's been going really well on testing. I'm enjoying it so much that it's going to be my starter build for 1.0. So I will be playing this on stream a lot the first week, 2 weeks, however long we go on this particular build. This is going to be the one that I'm playing. So I'm really looking forward to it. I think people are going to really enjoy this. This is competitive with Shadow Dagger's Blade Dancer on speed. That doesn't mean it's necessarily as fast. There's a lot of moving parts in which one will actually be faster, and it's still not clear to me which one. But if you're looking for a fast build and maybe something a little bit different than Shadow Dagger's Blade Dancer, this might be what you're looking for. Instead of the typical Blade Dancer setup, this is a Falcon that's going to pick you up, fly you to another part of the map, drop you off, and at the same time, drop off a bunch of Umbral Blades that are going to cause double Shadow Dagger procs on it, and it's also going to explode. We're using the explosions on this one, as well as the spinning parts of Umbral Blades, and it's just a lot of stuff that blows up pretty much everything in the area. And if they do happen to survive, we can then use Net, which will proc Puncture, another proc, which will also proc Shadow Daggers, and that does a lot of single target damage along with Aerial Assault, making this a very strong single target option. All right, so let's go ahead and get into the pros and cons of this build. So it is tanky. We'll see if it's as tanky as the Shadow Dagger Blade Dancer. There are reasons to think it may be and reasons to think it may not be, which we'll get into a little bit as we go through like the gearing section. But regardless, it is not going to be a pushover. It's not going to be super squishy. It is exceptionally fast. It is competitive with Shadow Dagger's Blade Dancer. It does very good damage, arguably probably better single target damage than Shadow Dagger Blade Dancer, and the clear is very high as well. It is good at all content. There is no content that it's going to struggle to do. It's going to be able to do tier 4 dungeons. It's going to be able to do corruption pushing. And of course, it can do speed farming. As far as cons, it is somewhat minion reliant. This is definitely new for a Shadow Dagger setup, but basically that comes down to Aerial Assault has a node that gives it 10% cooldown every time your Falcon hits something. And so if your Falcon isn't hitting things, you're not getting cooldown. But overall, it's not usually too much of a problem. And it's kind of fun to have the Falcon helping you out in that way. It does require some mana management, but most of that goes away when you get the right rings with the minus throwing mana costs. Once you get those, it pretty much goes away and you don't have to worry about it too much. But before that, you might have to manage it a little bit. It is vulnerable when not moving. It does take the agility node, which gives 25% reduced damage taken when moving. So when you stop, you take 25% more damage. Not great. And maxing the build does require uniques, but the build itself doesn't actually require uniques to get going. This isn't particularly unusual for builds, but this one does have that con. Okay, now that we got that out of the way, let's go ahead and get into the skills, and then from there, we'll go into the passives. So the first one and the star of the show for pretty much every Shadow Dagger setup right now is Umbral Blades. And like I mentioned previously, this one is going to take advantage of both the spinning and the explosions. So we're going to take Cacophony of Steel and everything that goes with it. And we're going to take Explosive Blades and everything that goes with it as well. We don't need Umbral Remnant for Shadows to drop Umbral Blades because we're not using Shadows to drop Blades this time. We are in fact using Aerial Assault, which is going to drop 6 at a time, and we're going to use Puncture to do the other portions so it's not even affecting it. So this isn't even a node we need to take, which is nice. It means we can take the spinning, the explosion, and still get the chill and the cold stuff with no downside. As far as Aerial Assault goes, the star of the show here is Twilight Strike, with the Umbral Blades and Feather Burst being 6, as well as the additional Shadow Daggers that proc. Yes, I have tested this extensively. Yes, both of these do count. You get double Shadow Dagger procs on that, or procs. Also, on this though, there are two very intriguing parts to this setup. Skyward Swoop is the cooldown reduction I was mentioning. The more often your bird hits, the quicker your cooldown. In packs, this can get you down to a second or less on its own. It's very strong. In areas where you don't have much density, not so good. We also have Missing Mana Recovered, so that helps with our mana regen, but this is a very intriguing part here too. Healing Gust and Gustborn Guard will give us some ward on missing health. This doesn't come into play too much in the standard setup, but as you'll see later, it comes into play a lot on the low life setup. As far as net goes, this is going to be taking advantage of Puncture to do some significant damage on a single target, but that's not all it does. But to get that, we are going to take Spear Trap. We're also going to take Server of Tricks, which is going to give us 3 traps at a time, allow us to really spam our Puncture on that. We also are going to get a bunch of buffs and debuffs from this. For example, Entangled Weapons, minus 12% physical damage from netted enemies is great. This is also the way we're going to stack our Frailty. We're also going to prevent enemies from dodging and avoiding crits from here, so we don't need it in our passive tree, which opens up some passive points, which is excellent. And we're going to get more damage against slowed or immobilized enemies, which this will do itself. It will slow and immobilize, so problem solved there, as well as an attack speed buff. So lots of buffs from net, and that's very strong in this setup. And of course, we already have talked about Puncture. We are going to be taking Puncture for Death's Imprint, the Shadow Dagger chance, and it does also progress with Armor Shred and Fizz Res Shred, so we don't need to worry about taking the Blessing here, which is also really nice. I will mention that this is actually going to switch. This is no longer going to count if you use this as a proc, if it's not a direct cast of Puncture. We'll be going down and taking this here, which won't do a whole lot. It'll add a little bit of area and a tiny bit of healing, a very small difference. There's not really much else here that's worthwhile. The last thing is Smoke Bomb in this setup, and the other Blade Dancer setup, we have moved out of Knives in the Dark. It just doesn't proc enough to be worth it. Instead, we are taking Smoke Blades, which is very, very good. This is now going to be additive damage instead of increased damage. Still very strong. We are also getting a lot of defensive buffs here from Moonlight Bomb. That is our guaranteed dodge. And from Shrouded in Darkness, Rapid Concealment for Dust Shrouds for dodge and Glancing Blow. And from Concealed in Carnage, which makes us take less damage over time. That is all the skills. Let's talk about the passives. So we've got a number of things in here that are very valuable. Some of these are things that you had before in like a Blade Dancer setup if you're playing it. Some of them are not. Evasion, always very, very strong. Minus 25% damage taken while moving, and the dodge rating is just great. And agility is always really strong as well. Haste on hit chance, and increased damage per 1% increased move speed, which ends up being 1% per 1%. So if you're over 100% move speed, you have over 100% increased damage. That's excellent. We also have Raptor's Wings now. This is new, where we get more haste chance and more damage with haste, 5% more damage. These do go well with Advent of the Erased, excuse me, which we will talk about in a little bit. But this needs you to have haste to proc, so this is a nice extra that it goes with it. For damage, we have Swift Assassin and Once, which are especially powerful nodes for this particular build because Shadow Daggers has both the melee and throwing tags, meaning it double dips on each of these. We get both the melee and the throwing damage from both nodes. Pursuit gives us a nice 8% move speed buff, along with some melee and throwing attack damage, so that's also very, very nice. And then in the Falconer tree, we have this very cool node called Tailwind, which gives us damage taken while moving, so that actually goes along with agility. Increased, I think I was saying it the wrong way. Evasion, excuse me, not agility, evasion. It goes along with evasion. Increased movement speed, increased dodge rating, and this is doubled when we have a recent Falcon hit, which is going to happen pretty much all the time, so it's a really great node. We also have Shroud of Dusk and Wilderness Scout to give us more health. Wilderness Scout being a new node from the Falconer tree. All right, that is the passives. Let's go into gameplay. So this rotation is a bit different from the Shadow Dagger Blade Dancer one. If you had played that, the primary thing you're going to do here is you're going to stay on the move and use Aerial Assault on cooldown. If you aim for large packs, you will basically obliterate them. Or if you want to go as fast as possible, try to move in a way that allows you to aim for one of the corners of your screen. You will go farther than if you aim anywhere else. You will then use net against tanky enemies and packs. You are going to want to use this skill directly on top of them for maximum Shadow Dagger stacks. Do bear in mind that you are not moving when you are casting net, which means agility and the other node from Falconer are not counting, so you are taking more damage if you do, so be careful where you choose to use this, or else it could get you killed. In extended fights, we are going to use Smoke Bomb, and the big benefit you're going to get here offensively is Smoke Blades, which is going to give us a ton of damage. But also, when we are staying in that smoke, we are going to build up stacks of our Silver Shroud. We're going to get that immediately, and then build up our stacks of Dusk Shroud and Crimson Shroud to be a lot more tanky. If enemies do become overwhelming, use Decoy to taunt them. That goes in our bar, even though we haven't specialized it, because we have 2 skills that are being procced from other skills, so they don't need to be on our bar. As far as mapping, it's pretty much the same thing. Not really a whole lot changes there. Same with bossing. With the one exception that you're going to use Smoke Bomb on cooldown, because you always have a tanky, prolonged fight. All right, moving on to gear. So, as far as uniques go, there are 3 that we generally want. We want Smoke Weaver, and we want this not for the shift or the cooldown or shift distance. That doesn't do us any good at all. What we really want it for is the dodge rating. This is an insane amount of added dodge, and it's really, really hard to find this kind of added dodge anywhere else. So if anyone tells you they don't understand why Smoke Weaver is in this build, it's for the dodge. It's got nothing to do with the shift. That's just a very, very strong amount of dodge rating that allows us to really boost our dodge chance. We also have Siphon of Anguish, which gives us a bunch of really good stuff. It's very easy to get legendary potential on this and throw on things like throwing damage and health, but itself gives us melee damage leech, it gives us movement speed, it gives us elemental resist, and Doom does act as a multiplier for the melee portion of Shadow Daggers. Finally, we have Advent of the Erase. This is a new one. I've never used this in a build. It was way stronger in testing, and it will be way stronger immediately on 1.0, but should quickly get nerfed due to a hotfix that's planned for it. The ward generation on this was good. It was getting up to 1,000 to 1,500 ward. That is not going to be the case as soon as that hotfix comes out. It's going to be effectively no ward. They've effectively killed that portion of it. You might have like 100 ward, so not really useful. But that's okay as far as still using it, as long as you get really good rolls on the Weaver's Will section of it. It does add less damage over time taken while you have haste, and more importantly, you get haste and frenzy on your minion, which means he will be able to hit enemies more often and reduce the cooldown of your aerial assault more often. So that's why we take this. If you don't get move speed on these boots, I wouldn't wear them. But if you do get that, then it's worth it. As far as the other gear on this, we do run a katana. Crit multi is awesome. Being able to put dodge rating on it, awesomer. And then we're going to run crit multi on it and melee fizz. And if you can get a sealed melee damage leech's health, even better. We of course want physical penetration with Shadow Daggers. We want that on both our body armor and on our helmet, and we're going to want it on our idols too. We'll get into that in a little bit. Other stats that we're looking for, we can scale a lot more flat damage because we can get throwing damage, since Shadow Daggers does both melee and throwing. So you're going to want to put that on your rings, and you're going to want to put it on your amulet, and on your relic, and even on your gloves if you can. We're going to scale health, so make sure to get as much as you can, especially hybrid and increased health. The other big interesting thing here that we've never used before, didn't use in the Blade Dancer setup, is the seconds of traversal skill cooldown recovered on potion use. I typically don't like on potion use effects, and that hasn't not changed here. However, it's just too good to pass up. When you can get aerial assault down to like a 1 to 1.5 second cooldown with the bird, and then you can just potion into instant use. As long as you're collecting potions consistently, this is going to allow you to jump from pack to pack instantly, as long as you continue to pick up the potions when you can. That's just a lot of power. So get this if you can on your gear. It's not necessary. It still runs really fast without it, but it's just another additional. This might actually make this even faster than Shadow Dagger Blade Dancer if you have it and you use it efficiently. Okay, that should do it for the general gearing, but I do want to talk about the low life setup. So this is going to be our highest potential EHP, and it does something that I was talking about previously, which is it interacts with Healing Gust and Gustborn Guard in a way that we otherwise couldn't. So to reiterate what's going on here with these particular nodes that are in Aerial Assault, they give Missing Health Recovered on Healing Gust, and then instead of that being health, it's ward. So when we take 5 points here instead of 2 points, and we get the Gustborn Guard, that means 50% of our missing health is going to be recovered every time we use Aerial Assault, which, as we talked about previously, could be every second or less, depending on how efficient you are with your rotation. So if you get to 3,000 or higher HP, that's 1,500 ward or more per second. That's a sizable amount of ward from this one area, but low life is really good in general right now if you strength stack. So here's the setup. Use last steps of the living, you use Exsanguinous, and you use a sealed version of the current health loss per second, missing health gained as ward per second, experimental fix. That is your low life setup, and then you scale ward retention through Cleaver Solution, which allows us to scale intelligence from our strength, giving us both ward retention, 4% per intelligence, but also 4% armor per strength, making this a much tankier setup. You do lose some damage in the process, but it is worth it if you're going to push high corruption. On top of that, we also add Twisted Heart of Kairos, which gives us big increased health and big strength. It gives it itself. It has 16th strength on it already, and then you can throw on more strength through an LP version. So with this setup, you can get much tankier, and it's very hard to kill you except for at very high corruption. So this is the setup that most people will probably go to if they play this for extended periods of time, but you'll do a bit more damage if you go with the regular endgame BIS. So it's really up to you whether or not you want to make that transition or you want to keep the higher damage and go for more of a speed farming setup. All right, that is the gear. Let's talk about the blessings and then the idols. So we are taking Grand Echo of Solarum to deal with our void resistance, then we don't need it anywhere else. We are taking Grand Rhythm of the Tide. Now this says increased health regen here, but it's not going to be that. It is actually added health and increased health, and it's enough to give you, I believe, over 100 health regen on its own. That is a pretty good extra amount. Now, of course, if you go the low life setup, you're going to want to get out of this, but if you're not low life setup, this is a great option. We take the Critical Strike Avoidance, which, along with one ring, will allow us to cap our Critical Strike Avoidance, and then we take the double armor blessings. We take one armor blessing here from the Grand Bulwark of the Tundra, and then we take the Endurance blessing here, Grand Embers of Immortality. This we will also get out with low life, and we will go with the double armor setup if you get the low life. All right, that's the blessings. Let's talk about the idols. This is a very similar setup, if not identical, to the Shadow Dagger Blade Dancer. You're going to want Fizz Pen with Shadow Daggers, but you can also put increased health in here if you want. It's up to you which damage, which you prefer, based upon whether you want to do more damage or be tankier. As far as the stout idols, you're going to have ideally 3 double health and then 1 increased health, 1 elemental resistance, depending on how your gear plays out. But use this as you need to take care of your resistances if that is necessary. The last thing we'll talk about is build scaling. We've covered pretty much everything in here. Flat melee and throwing damage. We just discussed how strong that is for Shadow Daggers. It's about it's actually 340% added damage scaling. This is nerfed from the pre 1.0. It does not significantly affect its overall damage. It, of course, does make it lower, but it's not enough to make this build not do high damage. It's still in a good place. Fizz Pen with Shadow Daggers talked about how good this is. Crit multi, also very strong. If you have a pair of Lyraka's Claws with significant LP, 2 or more, and you can get the rate of fixes on them, this can be an upgrade to your damage, but it is not necessary. Chance to shred armor on hit, we get that very easily in this build from Puncture.
And dexterity does increase our damage as well as our dodge, but is not a priority stat in this setup. Increased damage comes a lot from passives and dexterity, so we don't need to push a lot of it on our gear. As far as defenses, there's quite a bit going on here. We have our evasion. Wings of Argentus is no longer in this build, so I will remove that, but it was going to be in it before we had the ward changes. And Tailwind, our dodge is pretty strong from multiple places, but especially from Smoke Weaver. That's why that is so important. We need to take it. Our dot damage reduction is actually pretty good as well. Through evasion, through Tailwind, through Smoke Bomb, giving us Crimson Shroud stacks from Concealed and Carnage. We do have 2 Silver Shrouds in this one. It's a little bit different of a setup from Blade Dancer and the passive tree, but it still exists, so you will have 2 of those. And we do get some Glancing Blow. In fact, we will have 51% by default, but we have, if you haven't been hit recently, you get double that, which will be 100%. So as long as you don't get hit too often, you will always get a Glancing Blow. Armor mitigation is decent, but not amazing in the normal setup, but it's very, very good in the low life setup. We talked about decoy, we talked about health, and we talked about leech. We do get chill from our umbral blades. We do get frailty from, not from Shadow Cascade. I will also adjust that, but we do get frailty now from net instead. Ward and Amulet Cleansing on Potion does come from our belt. Critical Strike Avoidance will be capped through your blessing and through your ring. And we do cap our endurance on the non-low life setup, and we don't worry about it on the low life setup. All right. The last thing to talk about is loot filter. When this guide comes out, we won't have the 1.0 quite set up yet, but you won't need it yet. By the time 1.0 comes out, you will have the 1.0 COF and MG loot filters, and you will have the regular one until then. That is all I have to cover. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoy this build as much as I'm going to. Again, this is going to be my starter build for 1.0. That's how much I like it and believe it's going to be really strong. And if you want to try it out too, I highly encourage it. I hope you have a great time in Last Epoch and a great time with 1.0, and I'll see you all again real soon.